I'm 32 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how being discarded like trash became the greatest advantage of my entire life. Most people spend their whole lives chasing validation from the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally. But I learned early that sometimes the worst rejection becomes your most powerful transformation. Nobody claimed, the woman nobody saw coming, and the silent revenge that changed everything. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. You won't believe how being thrown away by my own parents at 7 years old turned me into someone they could never touch again. What I'm about to share isn't some fairy tale about rising from the ashes with forgiveness and grace. Strategic patience, and the kind of power that builds in silence while everyone else is busy underestimating you. If this story is hitting close to home already, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. You're going to want to see how someone goes from unwanted child to untouchable force. I still remember the exact moment my mother looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "We can't do this anymore, Claire. We're going to stay with your Aunt Patricia for a while." That while turned into my greatest weapon. Most people think being abandoned breaks you. And maybe it does, for a moment. But what they don't tell you is that when you have nothing left to lose, you become fearless in ways that privileged people never understand. While other kids were learning to manipulate their parents for love and attention, I was learning that survival doesn't require affection, it requires competence. And competence, I would soon discover, is the only currency that actually matters in this world. What my parents didn't know when they closed that door was that silence would become my sharpest advantage. I was 7 years old when my parents decided I was too much work. Not because I was a bad kid, I wasn't throwing tantrums. An inconvenience wrapped in a small body that required time, money, and emotional energy they had already decided to invest elsewhere. My father, David, barely looked at me the day they drove me to Aunt Patricia's estate in Connecticut. My mother, Linda, cried, but not because she'd miss me, because she felt guilty. And guilt is just ego dressed up as emotion. No promise to visit, no "we'll figure this out together." Just my small suitcase placed on marble steps, a quick hug that felt like a corporate handshake, and the sound of their car tires crunching gravel as they drove away without looking back. I stood there in front of that massive house with columns that looked like they could hold up the sky, and I remember thinking, so this is what being erased feels like. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about being erased. It's also incredibly freeing. Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next is absolutely insane. And leave a like if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you most. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that being discarded wasn't my ending. It was my reset. I wasn't going to spend my life begging for crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a burden. One where love wasn't the goal and power wasn't the goal and power wasn't negotiable. Standing on those steps at 7 years old, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never need anyone again. And more importantly, they would need me. That day would come sooner than any of them imagined. Being disowned didn't break me the way people expected it to. No desperate phone calls begging them to take me back, no nights spent crying into my pillow, wondering what I did wrong. Instead, something colder settled into my chest, a clarity that most people don't find until they're much older, if they find it at all. I realized that my parents' rejection wasn't about me. It was about them, about their limitations, their selfishness, their inability to see past their own comfort. Their opinions stopped mattering. I wasn't rescued out of love when Aunt Patricia took me in. Let's be very clear about that. She didn't sweep me into her arms and promise me a better life filled with warmth and belonging. Patricia was my father's older sister, a woman who had built a commercial real estate empire through ruthless discipline and zero tolerance for weakness. She took me in because family reputation mattered to her, so I became her project, not her daughter, not even really her niece, just another asset to be managed and optimized. That difference between being wanted and being managed shaped absolutely everything that followed. Most kids in my situation would have spent years trying to earn her love, performing for affection that was never coming. When I saw the transaction clearly from day one, Patricia offered structure, resources, and expectations. Not complaint, drama, or emotional mess. It was the cleanest relationship I'd ever had, because it was honest. No one was pretending to feel things they didn't. And in that brutal honesty, I found something surprisingly solid to build on. My aunt didn't hug me when I walked through those double doors for the first time. She didn't kneel down to my eye level with some reassuring smile and tell me everything would be okay. Patricia stood in the foyer of her Connecticut estate, a woman in her late 40s with steel gray eyes and a posture so perfect it looked like she'd swallowed a ruler. And she looked at me the way a general might assess a new recruit. "You'll stay in the East Wing, second door on the left," she said, her voice calm and emotionless. "Dinner is at 6:30 sharp. Don't be late." Her heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. There were no welcome gifts, no tours of the house, no "let me show you your new room, sweetie." Just rules, expectations, and consequences that would be explained as I encountered them. Patricia ran her home the way she ran her business, with ruthlessness and zero tolerance for excuses. If you're watching this and thinking she sounds cold, hit that subscribe button because you need to understand how that coldness became the foundation of everything I am today. And drop a like if you've ever had someone teach you strength instead of comfort. She didn't offer me love, solved problems. She offered me structure. And in her world, structure was the greatest gift you could give someone. Affection was a luxury reserved for people who had already proven their worth. And even then, it was dispensed sparingly, like a CEO approving a bonus. She wasn't cruel. She never hit me, never screamed, never made me feel unsafe. But she also never pretended we were something we weren't. I wasn't her daughter. I wasn't even really family in the warm fuzzy sense. I was a responsibility she'd accepted, and she would fulfill that responsibility with the same precision she applied to multi-million-dollar real estate deals. Looking back now, I realized that cold transaction was exactly what I needed, because love had already failed me. But standards were something I could actually meet. A library that looked like something out of a movie, and staff who moved through the halls like ghost efficient, invisible, perfectly trained, but none of that luxury was mine. I understood immediately that I was living in Patricia's world, surrounded by her wealth, but not entitled to any of it. There were no participation trophies in this house, no good job suite for simply existing. Friends, the performance, discipline, and results. My room was comfortable, but plain: a bed, a desk, a lamp, and nothing else until I proved I deserved more. There were no excuses accepted, ever. If I forgot to make my bed, I'd come home from school to find my mattress stripped completely, sheets folded on the floor with a note, "Try again." They'd still be there 3 days later, growing mold. Because Patricia believed natural consequences taught better than lectures, she never yelled, never gave me the "I'm so disappointed" speech. She simply let reality do the teaching. It felt cold at first, like living with a robot programmed to raise functional humans, because there was no manipulation, no emotional gain, no wondering if I'd done something wrong based on someone's mood. Other kids had parents who said "I love you" while enabling their worst behavior, protecting them from consequences, raising them to believe the world owed them something. I had Patricia, who never said she loved me but taught me something far more valuable: that I was capable of handling hard things. That comfort wasn't a requirement for survival. That discipline, applied consistently, created freedom instead of restriction. When you know exactly what's expected and exactly what happens if you don't deliver, there's a weird peace in that clarity. No kissing, no people-pleasing, no trying to read someone's emotions to figure out if you're safe, just standards and the choice to meet them or not. I learned early that in Patricia's house, effort was the only currency accepted. Not excuses, not charm, not even good intentions. She didn't care why I forgot to finish my homework or why I was late coming downstairs for dinner. She cared about results, and results were measured in concrete terms: tasks completed, deadlines met, standards maintained. It was like learning to speak a completely foreign language, one where emotional appeals meant nothing and performance meant everything. At 7 years old, that felt harsh. By 10, it felt normal. It felt like the only honest system I'd ever encountered. Mistakes weren't punished in the traditional sense. Patricia didn't ground me or take away privileges or give me long lectures about responsibility. Instead, she let mistakes carry their own weight. If I procrastinated on a school project and turned in garbage, she didn't rescue me with excuses to my teacher or help me fix it at the last minute. Let me sit with the consequences until I decided I never wanted to feel that way again. It was brutal in its simplicity. She wasn't being mean, she was being efficient, and outcomes don't care about your feelings. It was like learning to swim by being thrown into deep water, except Patricia was standing at the edge with a life preserver she'd only throw if I actually started drowning. I never drowned. I thrashed, I panicked, I swallowed water, but I always figured it out. Every single time I found a way to make it to the edge, and each time I did, I got a little bit stronger, a little bit more confident that I could handle whatever came next. Most kids were being taught that failure was scary and should be avoided at all costs. I was being taught that failure was information, and information was how you improved. And that distinction was never unclear. Art on the walls, the cars in the garage, the private chef who prepared meals I ate but didn't choose. I walked through rooms filled with luxury that other people would kill for, but I understood viscerally that none of it belonged to me. I wasn't Cinderella waiting for my fairy godmother to make me a princess. Luxury became background noise instead of temptation. While other kids my age were begging their parents for designer clothes and expensive toys, I was watching Patricia negotiate real estate deals on speakerphone, watching her review contracts with lawyers, watching her fire people without hesitation when they underperformed. Resonates with you.
What I learned next changed everything.
And hit that like button if you've ever been close to power without actually having it. The money wasn't the lesson, the mechanics of power were. I saw how decisions got made, how people with resources moved through the world with a confidence that had nothing to do with being liked. Before ever touching it, the way you'd study a dangerous animal before attempting to train it. I watched Patricia command rooms without raising her voice, watched her make people uncomfortable with nothing but silence, watched her build empires while other people built relationships.
Methodically,
Wasn't something you were born with or given, it was something you built through competence and the willingness to make hard decisions other people avoided. That understanding became my foundation, not the munchin, not the lifestyle, just the cold, clear knowledge that power was learnable if you paid attention. Patricia provided genuinely with obligation and everything to do with obligation and everything to do with survival. She gave me shelter when my own parents couldn't be bothered. She fed me, educated me, kept me safe from a system that chews up kids like me and spits them out broken. But gratitude doesn't erase reality, and the reality was that I was never fully included. But I wasn't part of the conversation unless directly asked a question. I lived in her house, but certain rooms were off limits without explanation. I existed in her world, but always at arm's length, always with the unspoken understanding that this arrangement was temporary, conditional, and could end if I stopped being worth the trouble. I knew my place with the kind of clarity most people never develop because they're too comfortable to need it. Not desire, because it reflected well on her, not because she felt maternal warmth. Every kindness came with an invisible price tag, every privilege had terms and conditions attached. That awareness sharpened my instincts in ways that kids raised with unconditional love never experience, to sense shifts in mood, to understand what was expected before anyone said it out loud. Over unspoken rules, that sense of being replaceably, of knowing that one major group could land me back in the system or shipped off to boarding school, it kept me focused. While other teenagers were rebelling and testing boundaries and demanding independence, I was quietly building competence, not because I was naturally obedient or lacked a spine, but because I understood leverage. Patricia had it, I didn't.
oh,
And the only way to change that equation was to make myself valuable enough that losing me would cost her something. So that's exactly what I set out to do. School wasn't about dreams for me. It wasn't about finding my passion or discovering who I was or any of that inspirational poster nonsense. School was leverage, plain and simple. Every A I earned was armor I was building piece by piece. Every skill I mastered was a tool I might need later to protect myself. While my classmates were stressing about college applications because they wanted to make their parents proud, I was stressing about college application because I knew education was the only thing that couldn't be taken away from me. Patricia could kick me out. My parents had already abandoned me. But knowledge, competence, those were mine forever. I wasn't chasing success in the way most people understand. It's some shiny vision of happiness and fulfillment and doing what you love, escaping vulnerability. I was building options so that I'd never again be at someone else's mercy. Never again have to stand on marble steps with a suitcase while the people who were supposed to love me drove away. Every math problem I solved, every language I studied was me constructing an exit strategy from dependence. It was methodical, it was calculated, and it was absolutely necessary. By the time I was 16, I was fluent in Spanish, had a 4, and was already taking business courses at the community college during summers. Not because Patricia pushed me, she didn't. She expected competence but never micromanaged how I achieved it. I did it because I'd watched her long enough to understand that the world doesn't reward, it rewards capability. People don't help you because you're struggling. They invest in you because you're. That's not cynical. That's just honest. However brutal, was the only currency I trusted anymore. Responsibility came early in Patricia's world, without praise and without warning. I was 17 when she handed me a stack of property files one Saturday morning and said, "Review these lease agreements and tell me which tenants are likely to default within 6 months. No training, no tutorial. No, let me show you how this works first. Just expectation and a deadline." Most people would have panicked or complained or asked for help. I spent the entire weekend teaching myself how to read financial statements, cross-referencing credit histories. When I presented my analysis Monday morning, Patricia nodded once and said, "You missed too, but the reasoning on the others is sound. Do it again next month." I was trusted with outcomes, not comfort. Patricia didn't baby me through the learning curve or celebrate my effort, pointed out gaps, and expected improvement. Or if this story is making you realize something about your own life, hit that subscribe button because the power shift that's coming is absolutely wild. And drop a like if you've ever been thrown into something you weren't ready for and figured it out anyway. There was no participation trophy for trying my best. There was only competence or incompetence, useful or useless, asset or liability. And slowly, through sheer repetition and necessity, I became useful. That's when I realized something most people never figure out. Power doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Power is quiet. It's being the person people turn to when something needs to get done. It's having answers when everyone else has excuses. It's competence so consistent that it becomes indispensable. By 18, I wasn't just Patricia's charity case niece anymore. coordinating with property managers, reviewing contracts before they hit her desk. I had become part of the machinery of her empire, and machinery doesn't get discarded, gets maintained. One day, somewhere between reviewing my 10th lease renewal and negotiating with a contractor who was trying to overcharge us, my competence stopped being training and became dependency. Patricia started asking my knowledge. She started saying Claire handles that instead of I'll take care of it. The shift was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it happening, like watching someone age, you don't see it day by day. But then suddenly you look up and everything is different. From burden to business partner, or what was once framed as learning opportunity. Her letting me handle small tasks to build character had quietly transformed into actual operational necessity. She needed me now not because she felt obligated to raise me, but because I had made myself valuable enough that losing me would create gaps in her infrastructure. I knew her systems better than most of her employees, could anticipate problems before they became crises, could interface with lawyers and accountants and contractors without making her look bad, and now I could run plays she didn't have to call anymore. Part she never noticed when the balance changed. To Patricia, I was still the grateful niece she'd rescued from abandonment, still the girl who should be thankful for every opportunity she provided. She never stopped to consider that gratitude and leverage aren't mutually exclusive. Well, someone's help while simultaneously building the capacity to no longer need it. She taught me everything I knew, gave me access to her entire operation, showed me exactly how her empire worked. She just never imagined I was paying such close attention. I never argued with Patricia, never demanded recognitions for my contributions, about fairness, or asked why I wasn't being paid for work that would cost her 6 figures to replace. Handled what needed handling and kept my mouth shut about the growing imbalance between what I contributed and what I received. To everyone watching, to Patricia, to her business associates, to the staff, my silence looked like obedience, like gratitude, like a well-trained niece who understood her place and was content to stay in it forever. They thought I was grateful, and I was. That part wasn't an act. Patricia had given me structure when I had nothing, shown me how power operated when most people never get that education. I was genuinely thankful for every harsh lesson, every cold transaction, every moment of clarity that came from living in a world without emotional manipulation. But gratitude doesn't mean powerlessness. Being thankful for someone's help doesn't obligate you to stay small forever. While simultaneously recognizing that I'd more than repaid that debt through years of unpaid labor, the difference between us was simple. Patricia saw my silence as proof of loyalty. I saw my silence as strategy. She interpreted my lack of complaints as contentment with the status quo. I understood my lack of complaints as patience, the kind of you develop when you're building something that can't be rushed. She thought she was teaching me to be a valuable employee in someone else's empire. She had no idea she was training her replacement. And every day that she misread my quiet competence as grateful obedience, I got a little bit closer to the outcome she never saw coming. I learned Patricia's business the way I'd learned her household rules, quietly, completely, without ego or fanfare. Or studied her commercial real estate empire with the same focused intensity I'd once applied to making my bed with hospital corners and arriving at dinner exactly on time. Every contract I reviewed taught me negotiation tactics. Every tenant dispute I mediated taught me conflict resolution. Every financial statement I analyzed taught me how money actually moves through systems, not the sanitized version they teach in business school, but the messy real-world version where cash flow is king and leverage is everything. By 25, I knew her operation better than she did in some ways, because she'd built it over 30 years while I'd absorbed the entire structure in less than 10. She knew it instinctively, through experience and pattern recognition, through deliberate study and documentation. Every vendor contract, every property quirk, every financial vulnerability. Not because she asked me to, she never did. That knowledge is the foundation of power, and power was the only thing that interested. Preparation disguised as compliance is the most effective strategy there is, because nobody sees it coming. While Patricia thought I was just being a good student, a grateful protege following instructions, I was actually building a complete working knowledge of an empire I had no legal claim to but complete operational control over. She signed the documents, she held the titles, she made the final calls, I managed the properties, I made the calls that set up her final calls, and slowly, methodically, the infrastructure became more dependent on me than on her. Ownership didn't arrive with confrontation, shouting matches, or some dramatic betrayal scene where I threw her mistakes in her face. It arrived with paperwork, the most boring, bureaucratic, unsexy transfer of power imaginable. Patricia was 68 when her health started declining, nothing catastrophic, just the slow erosion of energy that comes with age and decades of stress. She'd built an empire through sheer force of will, but will doesn't stop time, and time was catching up with her. One afternoon she called me into her office, gestured to a chair, and said, "I'm making you executor of the estate and primary operator of the business. My lawyers have the documents ready, just like that. No emotional speech about how proud she was. No acknowledgement of the 15 years I'd spent becoming indispensable. No recognition that this was anything other than a logical business decision, and honestly, that was perfect. Because this was never about validation or approval or finally getting the love I'd been denied. This was about structure, competence, and outcomes, the same currency we'd always dealt in. Osinger says, capability, and I was the most capable person in her orbit. The student hadn't rebelled, the student had simply outgrown the teacher. By the time she realized the full implications that I now controlled access to everything, that my signature was required on every major decision, that the infrastructure she'd spent 30 years building now ran through MIT, was too late to reverse it without creating chaos. The structure was already mine. Wrapped in manipulation or deception, but through the same ruthless competence she'd spent years teaching me. She'd raised me to be efficient, strategic, and unsentimental about power dynamics. Then she acted surprised when I applied those exact lessons to our relationship. That's not betrayal. That's just excellent education. I don't regret being raised without softness, without the warm fuzzy version of family that most people think they need to thrive. That softness failed me when my parents decided I was too inconvenient to keep. It would have failed me again if Patricia had coddled me instead of challenging, if she'd given me comfort instead of competence. Structure gave me freedom my parents never imagined was possible, the freedom that comes from being so capable that you're never at anyone's mercy again, never dependent on someone else's mood or generosity or conditional love. All taught me how to stand alone, and standing alone taught me how to lead. My parents thought they were getting rid of a burden. They actually created someone who didn't need them, didn't confuse affection with security. Patricia thought she was raising a grateful employee who'd spend her life managing someone else's empire. She actually trained someone who understood power well enough to claim it. Well, neither of them saw it coming because they both underestimated what happens when you take a discarded child and teach her that survival requires excellence. The girl nobody wanted became the woman nobody could ignore. Not through revenge fantasies or burning bridges or trying to prove anyone wrong. Just through quiet, relentless competence that turned into authority so gradually nobody noticed until it was already complete. I'm not angry at my parents anymore. They gave me clarity about human nature that most people never get. I'm not angry at Patricia either. She gave me tools that most people pay hundreds of thousands in business school to learn badly. They all played their parts perfectly in making me exactly who I needed to become. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you weren't enough and used that as fuel, instead of letting it destroy you, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because I share stories like this every week about people who turned their worst moments into their greatest power. And let me know in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later realized their mistake? Watch the next video on your screen about silent revenge and strategic patience, because sometimes winning doesn't make noise, it makes history.
Isn't destruction?
Oh, powerful. That the people who threw you away realize they discarded the one person who could have been their greatest ally. And by the time they figure that out, you're already 10 steps ahead, building something they can't reach. That's not cruelty. That's just consequences, meeting preparation. Thank you for watching my story, where we dive even deeper into how strategic silence becomes unstoppable power. Remember, being discarded isn't your endings, your authorization to build something nobody can ever take away. Subscribe, and let's keep building together.